And let's go. What is going on, guys? This is Fred along with my co-host Che. What's going on, Mr. Che?
Nothing much, just very excited and curious. What about you?
Very excited and curious. So I am also very excited and curious, but what are we very excited and curious about, Che?
Well, a certain former WWE superstar known as CM Punk has signed a multi-fight deal with the Ultimate Fighting Championship.
What?
Yes, sir.
So, of course, we wanted to do a special abbreviated version of the shootcast to sort of cover this. Both of us were obviously watching the UFC last night when this actually formally got announced. I was looking at rumors on MMA websites earlier in the week. I believe as early as Thursday or Friday, it was actually confirmed that he was indeed going to be there at UFC 181 in order to have a talk with Dana White, Lorenzo Fertitta. Dana White went on to Jim Rome's show, talked about the fact that they might bring him in. If they did, they'd start him off slow. And what would you know? On the broadcast, the pay-per-view broadcast of 181, he had a cage side interview with Joe Rogan and announced that he had indeed signed to make a debut in 2015.
And I am fucking shocked. I heard these rumors before last night, but I just thought it was going to be something, maybe he can announce a fight or do something promotional with them, like sell a couple of shirts. I did not expect him to be an actual UFC fighter. Freaking crazy.
I know, and I think this announcement has really taken Twitter by storm. Everybody's buzzing. People are trying to figure out, how will he do? Who will he go against? So that's what we're going to kind of talk about. We're going to look at this from a few different angles, and I think at the end of this podcast, we'll uh, we'll have just as many questions as everybody else, but at least we'll flesh it out a little bit here.
Yes, sir.
So just to start with, just to give a little bit of background, CM Punk wanted to actually come out with, I believe it was Chael Sonnen. Yeah, so he wanted to come out at UFC on Fox 2 in Chicago with Chael Sonnen. This was in 2012, and the WWE put a stop to it. They said that, no, we don't want to have him on camera at a UFC event. He then, after UFC 148, Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen, the rematch, Chael Sonnen obviously hit a spinning back fist, missed it, fell onto his ass. Anderson Silva came over and kneed him in the chest while he was still down. CM Punk actually recreated that finishing sequence in a match. And then, as CM Punk tells it himself, the sequence of events is at UFC 170, in I believe it was February last year. He had been invited. He came cage side, was sitting next to Dana and Lorenzo. Lorenzo asks him sort of jokingly, "Hey, would you ever be interested in doing something something like this?" He said yes, completely seriously. He then gave them his contact information. He went on to have a bunch of trouble with the WWE in terms of legal issues. Sort of had that, I would say, a walkout, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I agree to be a walkout.
A walkout. And by the end of October, he says that Dana and Lorenzo actually flew out to Chicago, had dinner with him. They talked it over. And after some back and forth with his lawyers and the UFC's lawyers, they actually came to an agreement, which seemingly was very, very recently, because they had this sort of, there's going to be a big announcement. It didn't actually come to fruition. A lot of people were rumoring that it was actually the CM Punk signing. So we finally have it very recently. I would even speculate to say that it happened within the last week, if not last night.
And what can I say? Um, I think it's a very big opportunity for CM Punk. Of course, I give him credit for actually stepping up to the plate and stepping into the octagon. No matter what happens, it does take balls to fight in the octagon, of course. But How is it going to work out? How are they going to execute this? What do you think?
Well, see, the problem is he doesn't have any amateur MMA fights, right? So he's coming in. His first professional fight is also going to be his first fight in the UFC. And the big thing here, beyond the UFC, is going to be the Athletic Commission. Every fight that takes place in the United States is going to have to get sanctioned through a government body, also known as the Athletic Commission, the State Athletic Commission.
Hmm.
And they always look at competitiveness. So it would be very unlikely that they would sign off on any fight for a 0-0 fighter if it's against anyone more than, say, I don't know, 0-2, 1-0.
Yeah.
As if it was as high as, say, 2-0, I'd think that they might have some reservations.
And what's worse about this is the fact that it would have been better if, CM Punk was maybe a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or just had some other training that, yes, he doesn't have a fighting background when it comes to amateur professional, but look, he's done the training. I believe he only has a white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
That is correct. He's been
And
training for 3 years with Hiron and Henner Gracie, which are obviously um, descendants of the Gracie family. So definitely credible names, definitely big names in the jiu-jitsu community.
yes,
So his actual instruction, the actual instruction that he's getting is definitely legitimate. No one can take away from the instruction. I would say the amount of time and the consistency that he's actually been training would come into question because he claims that he's been training for 3 years. However, roughly 2 of those years he was still in the WWE on the road all the time.
not to mention the bumps and the bruises and all the shit that the wear and tear that pro wrestling does to you. I mean, no one can doubt that your body takes a huge beating as a professional wrestler.
Of course.
It's not an argument. So the thing is, on top of him having to fight his first professional fight ever in competition, it's going to be a pain in the ass for him to train because he's in his 30s. He's been wrestling for over 10 years. So I don't think his body's up to the challenge. I mean, it's tough.
It's definitely tough. And like I said, I mean, trying to find a matchup for him in the UFC, maybe if he were to do some amateur fights, it would be a lot easier to get him opponents. But to get him a fight in the UFC with no prior record at all is going to be very difficult for him. And I think it's going to be something where the UFC is going to have to look outside of their roster and bring somebody in order to actually find him a match that the athletic commission will sign off on. Because to be honest with you, it is, I would say it is technically impossible to get a UFC contract if you had not at least had amateur fights. The only example I can come up with is Matt Riddle. Matt Riddle was a guy who I believe, let me look this up. I believe he was on The Ultimate Fighter, but he's always touted as being a person who had their first professional fight in the UFC. But that is completely different than having his first fight at all in the UFC. And
Exactly.
obviously the comparisons to Brock Lesnar will come up. However,
No.
Brock Lesnar had a extensive amateur wrestling background. He was the NCAA Division One champion for 2 years, and he's an athletic freak. And
Exactly.
Punk has none of those attributes.
No, it's very different. I mean, as we was talking about, having an amateur wrestling background helps you out very much. You know what I mean?
Right.
Especially him being champion, the NCAA first division champion, right?
Right.
Yes.
So here's Matt Riddle. Matt Riddle has a background in high school and college wrestling.
Mhm.
Let's see here. Oh, sorry. No. Just high school. He was the New York State wrestling champion in high school. He's
Okay.
1-0 in amateur MMA. And he's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu. He had one amateur fight, and then he got onto the Ultimate Fighter, which is different, a whole different beast altogether.
Yes.
He then had his first professional fight in the UFC. So if you want to be technical, he was a case where he had his first professional fight in the UFC. However, he had one amateur fight before that. So this is definitely a unique case. I think that this is unprecedented, and I think, at least in the modern era, let me be clear. At least in the modern era, I think that stuff was happening in the early UFCs before the sport was established, before the sport got started. But just to be specific, in the modern era, I think that this is completely unprecedented.
Definitely. I don't know what to make of it. Of course, from a business sense, this is absolute genius because of the following that Punk has. All parties are going to make a shitload of money in this business operation. Not to mention, Dana White's smart for doing this because he can get a lot of wrestling fans into MMA. And not to mention, I'm not for sure, but I think I know one of the reasons why CM Punk did this to snub his nose at the WWE.
Hmm.
Think about it, Fred. This is the ultimate fuck you to the WWE.
The ultimate
Join,
fuck you.
yes,
Fuck the ultimate
joining,
fighter. The ultimate fuck you.
yes, joining their competition. You know what I mean?
I completely agree. I mean, it
But
seems like this is just the perfect storm of circumstance, right? You have a very dissatisfied individual with the WWE. You have a company that has been dying for a pay per view attraction. When you think about pay per view in general, even though it is sort of a North American phenomenon, the pay per view in general is very much star based. It's very much a spectacle.
mhm,
That's why you have guys like Floyd Mayweather who draw incredible amounts. It's about Floyd Mayweather, the character, not so much about boxing in general. You know what I mean?
exactly.
So UFC has had to sort of get by on the brand name. Unfortunately, they're trying to build stars, but they haven't been panning out as much as they'd wanted to. Champions aren't guaranteed draws. And, the UFC brand is getting less and less popular, and that's what they've been coasting on for, I'd say, since Brock Lesnar left. GSP left, Brock Lesnar left, Anderson Silva's lost, and he was injured for a while. So they're in a tough spot, and I think that, like I said, this was just a perfect storm of circumstance where you have a guy that is passionate for the UFC. He claims, I believe him, and he I think that part of CM Punk's angle here is to screw over the WWE by bringing over wrestling fans and converting them into MMA fans.
Now, the big question remains, who will he fight? Do you have, Fred, do you have any ideas on who would be a legitimate but fair opponent for CM Punk?
Well, I had a tough time with that last night. I have a MMA centered Twitter at always MMA. What I called for was, and you might laugh at this, CM Punk versus Jason David Frank, aka the Green Power Ranger.
Now, when I first heard of this, I started laughing my ass off. I actually had the Power Ranger theme going off in my head. But when you examine it, it actually would make much sense. As everyone knows, that's a fan of Power Rangers or whatever, even general people. He is, I think, what was it, seventh degree black belt
He
in
is a
karate?
seventh degree black belt in Kyokushin karate.
Yes.
And I believe he is a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Let me just make sure here before I make
Yes,
a
and
unsubstantiated claim.
if we what you can also look up is I think he has about four amateur fights under his belt, not under his belt, under his reign or whatever.
So
But
what we've got here, seventh degree black belt in karate. Let's make sure. Um,
yes, I think he has a school too, Rising Sun Karate.
he does. I'm just trying to see exactly which variant of karate. It doesn't actually say. Interesting. He has his own style, which is pretty interesting. Titled Toso Kundo. Interesting.
Ooh.
And like I said, it just says karate. I was under the impression it was Kyokushin karate, but until I can confirm that, we'll just use the generalized term karate. Purple belt in jujitsu. So his current record, he's got 4 amateur fights, all finishes. He's got all first round finishes. He's got an omoplata in a minute and 7 seconds. He's got a TKO to strike in 2 minutes 9 seconds, a KO via knee in 23 seconds, and an armbar in 24 seconds. Now, keep in mind, though, these were all in 2010. We've got January
Yes.
30th, February 19th, May 8th, May 22nd. So these are in very close proximity. Seems like he went in bursts here. So he went
Uh-huh.
January 30th to February 19th. Then he took, 3 months off. Then he came back May 8th, May 22nd. These are all in 2010. Then
Wow.
looks like 3 months, not even 3 months later, he did his first professional fight in August 4th of 2010.
Did he win?
He won first round submission, rear naked choke, 46 seconds.
Impressive.
So, I mean, looks like he's got a total of less than 5 minutes in the ring. He's got a minute 7, 2:09, 23 seconds, 24 seconds, 46 seconds. So that's less than a full MMA round of 5 minutes. So yeah, obviously he's been inactive. I'm sure 4 years is gonna sort of even the odds, I guess. I'm
Yes.
not sure why he's been inactive. It says that in 2011 he was supposed to fight Sean Machado at Legacy FC 7, which would have definitely been good. That would have been a step up. But
Yes.
he did a, let's see, he had to pull out of the fight because of a torn bicep.
Oh, injuries.
But no word as to why he hasn't fought since then.
Um, I don't know, but now we got his record and we got his background. Let's look at this from a business standpoint. If this fight were to actually happen, how much would you think it would draw? A shit ton?
Well, this would definitely be the biggest drawing pay per view since Brock Lesnar left. Like I was saying before, the UFC has been itching for a replacement to Brock Lesnar. I mean, when he came, he sort of took the MMA world by storm. He brought them unprecedented business with million plus pay per view buys. I believe his peak was 1.6 million pay per view buys.
Damn.
That is incredible and definitely something that they've not even come close to before. I believe the largest pay per view they've done since was just shy of a million with Anderson Silva versus Chris Weidman 2.
Ooh.
Or no, 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 sorry. Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen 2. That was UFC 148. That
Okay.
was the biggest pay per view they had done since. And nothing has come close since. They've had sort of they sort of caught lightning in a bottle with Ronda Rousey, but she hasn't really come over to the big pay-per-view side. She's a big attraction. She's in the media. She's doing movies, but she hasn't really produced the pay-per-view buys that they'd like. And since then, she's sort of been relegated to being co-main events instead of actually headlining cards herself. So,
So
personally
basically,
speaking,
CM Punk is that remedy.
I think yeah, I think that that's the closest that they can come to recreating the Brock Lesnar boom. To be honest with you, though, as far as buys, if I had to estimate, it depends. It depends what they're gonna do. I don't believe that
Yes.
they can in any way put him as a headliner. I think that they'd have to put him as the co-main event of a card.
Yes.
Judging on what they put with it, I don't believe that they'd have to waste a huge fight to be able to make that fight marketable. So let's just say that they do. I mean, they're probably going to do a title fight. Let's say that they do Demetrius Mighty Mouse Johnson or TJ Dillashaw, two of the least drawing pay per view draws right now. Let's say that they do one of those guys as the headliner. They do CM Punk versus Jason David Frank in the co-main event. Man, that's a 1.2 million buy in my opinion. 1.2 million.
Definitely. Wow. Okay, let's talk about the fantasy matchup. What would you think would happen if them two ever got in the octagon? Who you think will take
Well,
it?
speaking candidly, I think CM Punk gets his brains blown out.
Not much faith in him, huh?
Well, you have to think about it this way. Does he have the striking instinct? Is he going to turn away from punches? Is he going to be closing his eyes? Um, is he going to be able to react when someone swarms him? I mean, if you've seen the way that Jason David Frank fights, he is a seventh degree black belt. He has had strikes thrown at him his whole life. I mean,
Exactly.
the thing here, the missing element of CM Punk, besides actual technique, is time. There's nothing that you can do to make up time. So I don't believe that CM Punk has the instincts that he needs to be able to compete in an MMA fight, especially at the professional level, especially against other professionals. Like I said, Jason David Frank, if he were to fight anyone on the roster right now, he would get drubbed. And if you look on the roster right now, I can look right now. Let's see, middleweights. Here we go. I'm gonna look at just the lowest, the guys with the lowest record here. Bubba Bush. Bubba Bush would demolish Jason David Frank. Josh Saman, he's the guy that just had that head kick knockout last night.
Oh,
Um,
tough.
Vitor Miranda, Vitor Miranda would drub him. Um, Jake Collier would drub him. Sheldon Westcott would drub him. These guys, I mean, I don't see, and this is just speaking on Jason David Frank.
Hmm.
Now, it's going to go even worse for
Yeah.
CM Punk, who
Yeah,
has
he'll
not only no amateur fights, not only a way lower pedigree in both striking and Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Because if you listen to CM Punk's interviews, he's saying that Brazilian Jiu Jitsu he's considering that his base.
he has
Um,
no choice but to consider that his base.
right. So I don't really see how a UFC fight is going to go for CM Punk when he's considering Brazilian Jiu Jitsu as his base. And he's saying things that are a little bit scary. He's saying, well, yeah, of course I can fight. It's in your DNA. Well, kind of. But when it comes time to
No.
execute,
Yeah, we're not talking about a bar brawl.
right.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
um,
it, it's really a tough thing because, you can be 110% involved with it, but, and as much as, his fans are pulling for him to win or do great, the sad truth is a reality kicks in. If he were to win these fights legitly, he would probably be like the fucking he'd probably have like blood of the gods. You know what I mean?
now don't get me wrong, okay? As a UFC fan, as an MMA, I don't want to consider myself a UFC fan. I would consider myself an MMA fan. I'm a fan of the sport, not
Mm.
just one particular brand. So as an MMA fan, looking at the biggest brand that there is, the UFC, um, I want them to do well.
Oh, of course.
I want CM Punk to succeed. I want him to continue to fight in the UFC. I want him to continue to draw eyeballs to the sport. I want him to grow the sport. But I don't see that happening realistically.
Now, I was just thinking about this real quick. Is there any way that maybe in the next 3 or 4 months they can get him in at least one amateur fight? Let's say he fights at the end of the year. Would that help him?
It would help him. It would definitely help him sort of get the pressure off of himself before he got into the big show, but it's a risk. The same thing I was actually arguing. I mean, he's in this far now, right? So
Uh-huh.
there's no reason to step backwards. If he were to say get a tune-up fight in amateur MMA, what if he loses?
Yeah. It would have definitely been better if, like, let's say when he quit WWE back in February, I believe, if he had like a couple of amateur fights before that and then said, well, I want to hop in the UFC.
In my opinion, this is going to be a one and done type of thing. I believe he has some luster to him, based on the fact that people sort of view him with curiosity, right? I think a lot of
Yes,
people are going to tune in for the curiosity's sake. If he were to get his brains blown out, like I think he will, then the curiosity's kind of gone. Then it's sort of
definitely.
people tuning in more just to see him get drubbed again than to see how he'll do. They'll know how he'll do, and they'll just want to see him get beat up. And I think a lot of wrestling fans are definitely going to be curious. They're going to think like, yeah, this guy has sort of a reputation for being this or that. I want to see him either get his comeuppance. I want to see him succeed. There's going to be so many different angles as to why people
Uh-huh.
are curious to tune into this. And I think that if he does actually win, and if he does have another fight, can you imagine how big that fight would be?
Fucking crazy. What would you say to those people that say this is an abomination to the sport? That there are people that, basically, giving CM Punk an automatic roster spot is disrespectful to people that are up and coming and they're trying their best to get in the UFC. What is your thoughts on that as an MMA fan?
As a fan, I would have to sort of refer back to the actual athletes of the sport, and just look at their reactions, because at the end of the day, they're the ones that have the right to be offended. For me to say that I'm offended on their behalf isn't actually very genuine, right? I don't think that any outside observer should be able to say like, well, I'm outraged on someone else's behalf. Basically, I've seen the Twitter reaction. A lot of people are reacting positively to it. I think MMA is a very welcoming community, whereas professional wrestling is a very exclusive community. If I actually look right now, I'll check out an article on MMAfighting.com called "Pros React." So we've got we've got Michael Bisping. I see CM Punk wants to kick ass. Well, he can kiss my ass. Welcome to the UFC. Let's do this. Ulysses Gomez. CM Punk in the UFC? Get the fuck out of here.
Oh boy.
Charlie Brenneman. So who is Punk gonna fight? A legit fighter? Not aware of any background.
Hmm.
Ally Quinta. I want to fight CM Punk.
Oh shit.
Colby Covington. Let's dance, CM Punk. I always wanted to whoop a fake wrestler's ass anyway.
Oh jeez.
Roy Nelson. Congrats to CM Punk on UFC contract. Iron Sheik. CM Punk shocked the world, Bubba.
Oh boy. Seems like a lot of people want to kick his ass.
So yeah, CM Punk was claiming that a lot of the reaction has been positive. Um, hmm. I don't know if maybe this article was written with focusing on the
The negative.
negativity, but okay. So I guess based on this small sample size, I would have to say that some of the actual athletes think this is a bit unfair. But like I said, for me personally, I don't feel like I could give a credible opinion as to if it's deserved or if it's fair or anything like that. I mean, at the end of the day, if he's in over his head, he's gonna pay with his physical well-being, right? I mean, it's not like he's gonna get into the NBA and he's gonna ride the bench and still get paid. Um, this is very much a expose, if you will, if he's not going to take this seriously and if he's not going to train. And if he doesn't have the skill to do it, it's going to show on fight night.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, look, no one before, we don't want to say that like CM Punk's a bitch because as as this the shoe cast, as fans of pro wrestling, well, more of older pro wrestling, but you get what we're talking about. We know the sacrifices pro wrestlers make. I mean, I know a lot of people make fun of them because the outcome is determined, but ladies and gentlemen, it is tough to be a pro wrestler. I mean, your body takes a beating. You cannot sit there and say that these people are, they're not tough enough when it comes to that. You know what I mean? You get where I'm coming from?
No, of course. I mean, it's a different kind of
Yes.
toll that your body takes, definitely.
Theatrics.
Right. I
Theatrics
mean,
versus
it's
competition.
there's a different psychology to it. There's very much a mental element to it. You know, being away from your family for so long. There's a little bit of a parallel, obviously, with training camps. Some guys choose to have their training camps a little bit further from home, so they do actually have to leave their family. And obviously on fight night they have to leave, but that's a much shorter period that you're out.
Hmm.
So I would say that in addition to the physical, there is a very big mental toll that you go through as a professional wrestler. I mean,
Hmm.
being away from home all the time, never being able to feel like you're setting down home base, going from hotel to hotel, city to city.
Yes. But, at the end of the day, man, I think the biggest winners in this is UFC, of course, because whether Punk gets his ass whipped or he kicks ass, man, all eyes are on the UFC. Definitely taking some eyes away from the WWE. And I think
Absolutely.
I think that's what Punk's biggest goal was to piss off Vince McMahon in the WWE as much as he can. And no doubt, this is a giant knife in the back, not in the back, but this is a giant um, snub of the nose at them. I mean, how many fans you think are going to be focusing on his road to UFC competition? A
Millions.
lot, millions. And if he fights Jason David Frank, that was his name.
That's right.
If he fights Jason David Frank, oh my gosh, how many fans could potentially buy this or follow the sport? It's the opportunity's endless. It's ridiculous. The UFC is gonna come out the winner in this no matter what happens, and the UFC is looking like fucking losers. I mean the WWE.
I completely agree. Like I said, I mean, the UFC is very much in need of a pay per view attraction. And I mean, you think about CM Punk, if he's actually going to start, doing some trash talk, I mean, that's what he got years of experience doing in professional wrestling.
Be tough. I would try not to open my mouth.
I mean, I want you to think about this realistically, right? If you're doing professional wrestling, if the cat's out of the bag that it's choreographed, you have to be such a good trash talker to be able to get audiences engaged into the actual match.
Oh yeah, you have to be a character, man. It's it's definitely theatrics. Fuck. But you're right. CM Punk, we all know his skills on the mic. When he dropped that pipe bomb, remember that?
I do.
He definitely knows how to talk shit on people. But oh my gosh, it did be tough for him to do that in the UFC because oh, think about it, dude. He could catch a worse ass whipping for talking shit.
I mean, I feel like Brock Lesnar very much had the same dilemma. Am I going to be a trash talker or am I going to be very respectful? And at the end of the day, Brock Lesnar went the respectful route. He was very very humble, um, for the most part. And I think that CM Punk, I don't know. It's tough. It's very tough because he does have the personality where he might not feel like he's talking trash, but he might be saying things that are very arrogant. He's already said things like, I'm going to make them respect me. I will settle for nothing less. And maybe in his mind, he sees it as, I'm going to earn my respect and I'm not going to stop until I do. But I think a lot of people can interpret that as, yeah, I'm going to make them respect me, that kind of stuff. So
Hmm.
I feel like CM Punk is very, very strong worded. I think that he is very unapologetic. And I think that he's going to say how he feels, he's going to say what he thinks. And I don't necessarily think he's going to have the biggest filter when it comes to how it's going to be interpreted.
Definitely. Very interesting. I cannot wait to see this happen. I'm excited. I'm gonna keep up to date with training camps or whatever. And when do you think the fight's gonna happen? Late 2015?
Well, he has talked about the fact that he does want it to be late 2015. I'm gonna look
No
at the
doubt.
UFC schedule because I believe he alluded to the fact that he knows when the UFC is going to Chicago next, and he feels like that's gonna be a little bit too early.
Yes, I would definitely agree. I would definitely want to pick as late as possible. I'd somewhere in December. That gives him a year to train his ass off. That's what he's gonna have to do. He's gonna have to train as much, but he has to work on a lot of things, man. I mean, he has a white belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He could still work on that, but he has to work on his wrestling and his striking. He has a lot of base to cover in a very short time.
To be honest, I think that they're actually gonna slot him in. If I had to predict it, I would say they're gonna slot him in UFC 194 on December 5th.
Hmm. Ooh,
That's my official prediction.
yes, that
UFC
sounds.
194 on December 5th.
Hmm. He has less than a year, if that's true.
Well, basically, what he said he wants to do, he wants to train for 6 months and reevaluate, see where he's at.
You mean like he could have back out in
No,
six
no, no.
months?
I mean, he wants to take a step back and see where he's at. I don't think he's going to back out, no, but I think he's going to train for 6 months and then sort of evaluate where he's at that point.
Oh shit. Ugh. He's gonna have to train more than that.
Well, that's the thing, right? So he has such a skill deficit and such a time and experience deficit that it's not really going to get closed all that well, and he's not getting any younger.
Definitely. Not to
So
mention all the beatings that he's taken from professional wrestling,
it could be taken either
botches.
way.
It could be botches. Just regularly going through the whole motion of being a professional wrestler. Mm,
Yeah, I mean, one botch could
boy,
fuck you up for life.
yes, it is a very. Oh man, it's
So,
whew.
so Che, let's say, for instance, he wins that first fight. I don't know how. Say he gets a guillotine on Jason David Frank. Would you like to see him actually step up to the lower level of MMA, the mid level of MMA? What would you think if he was to win that first fight?
Well, let's say he did win that first fight and it was against someone like Jason David Frank. I think that he should fight in the lower. Okay? I mean, look, Jason David Frank, he has a seventh degree black belt. Brazil, he has some amateur fighting experience and even one professional fight, but still, he would have to go to the lower tier of the middleweight division. You know what I mean? It would be, I mean, it would be, he would have a better chance fighting a professional UFC fighter because he had his professional debut. He went through the motions and all that jazz, and he won if that happens. But still, there's no way he could win that one fight and decidedly go up against somebody that's like 6-0 or something. You know what I mean?
Right.
No
Well,
matter what, he's gonna have to work his way up from the lowest of the low, which is not shitting on anybody, but it's just the truth. One fight is not gonna, it's definitely gonna help him, but still, he would still have to climb that ladder from the very bottom.
right. I mean, they definitely fast tracked Brock Lesnar because of his collegiate wrestling experience.
Exactly, and how it that helps tremendously. Would you say?
Oh my goodness. I mean, if you were to make a food pyramid of UFC, of MMA techniques, I would say that wrestling would be the base.
Yeah. So, okay. Let's imagine you're a CM Punk's coach or a manager or whatever, and your goal is for him to look as best as he can in loss or in winning or whatever the hell happens. What would be your goal, your game plan for CM Punk? What would you tell him to do?
Um, what's the time frame?
Well, let's say he said he's going to train for 6 months and then reevaluate. So what will he be working on in those 6 months? If you was telling him, if you was guiding him.
Well, I mean, I think it would be equal parts of jujitsu, of wrestling, and of Muay Thai. I think that His jiu-jitsu is already going to be there. I think that it would be good to build his wrestling, to give him a little more confidence that he would actually be able to implement it. And obviously, he's going to need, at the very least, some sort of striking to be able to survive. Because let's say that he works on his wrestling and his jiu-jitsu, he's not just going to be able to just rush right in and be for sure that he's going to get a takedown. And if he has no striking, he's going to get drubbed. So um, I would say it would be reasonable to do equal parts wrestling, jiu-jitsu, and Muay Thai. Um, that's the thing, though. We still don't know how good he is in jiu-jitsu. Um, he could be great. He could be a phenom. We just don't know. And one of the things that I'm worried that he's just training solely with Hidon and Henner, just the coaches, and getting private. Excuse me. I'm worried that he's just getting private lessons. When you're only training with your coaches, they have a certain feel and you know what to expect, and they're not going 100%. When you're with a class of different people, just an open class, just regular Joe Blow comes in. You get to feel all different types of intensity levels, all different types of skill sets, all different types of experience, personalities. Maybe there's some guy that always comes in on Wednesdays and he goes 110%, and you just hate that fucking guy and you just want to get him back every time that you see him. But then there's somebody else that's nice and friendly with you. You shake hands, you have a nice 50% roll. You have to be able to feel that, because you're not just going to go in there and roll with a guy that's taking it easy on you.
Yes. Well, it's going to be a very tough couple of months. Well, not a year, let's say, for CM Punk. He's got the whole world watching. So I wish the best of luck to him. I don't want to see him get like fucking hurt or paralyzed or anything. But talk about climbing Mount Everest. You know what I mean?
I mean, he is just. I admire the courage to be able to do something like that.
Oh, yeah,
To
takes
open
balls.
yourself up to that sort of criticism. To be honest, we both know that he's not going to ever contend for a title, right? I mean,
No.
that's never going to happen. It sort of seems more like a bucket list type of thing. And, for him to have the courage to enter into a sport where he knows that eventually he's going to get fucked up. I mean, let's be completely honest with you, with each other. If he wins his first fight and looks good and doesn't take any sort of punishment, they're going to put him up against somebody tougher and tougher and tougher and tougher.
Oh,
And
he's eventually gonna get his bell rung.
he is eventually going to get demolished.
It's only a
Whether
matter of
it be the
time.
first fight, whether it be the second fight, there is no way that he is going to go unscathed. I that is a promise. I personally think it's going to be in the first fight, but there's no, and that is the risk that he is taking, and he knows that that is what he's taking.
Balls, man.
So that's, like I said, definitely a lot of courage, and I can say that I'm very interested as a very devout MMA fan. I'm very interested in seeing this, and I'll definitely be watching no matter what anyway. But if I were a casual observer, if I was just a WWE fan, I would absolutely be tuning into this to see what happens. I mean, there's no way that you. I mean, even though there's going to be people pirating it, they're still going to be watching MMA. They might catch the UFC fever.
Mm-hmm. Type of a best of both worlds type thing. You got someone like UFC. He's gonna bring in the pro wrestling crowd, and he's obviously gonna, since he's a fan of MMA or UFC, he's he's gonna bring in a lot of people, man.
For sure.
Smart business move.
For sure. So yeah, I think we've covered it from all angles. Are there any last thoughts? Any last things that you want to say about the situation before we wrap
Um,
up here?
I just want to say one thing. Best of luck to you, CM Punk. You're gonna fucking need it, and I'm saying that in a friendly way.
I echo that sentiment, man. And like I said, I personally want to see CM Punk versus the Green Power Ranger, aka Jason David Frank, because I think that that would be an equally matched fight, at least as equally matched as you can get. And if they're going to go outside of the UFC to try to find somebody, he at least has some name recognition, and it's a very novel fight. You know, it's definitely a novelty. So that's what I'd like to see. If you want to check up on MMA, I just made a new Twitter account specifically for MMA. It's at always MMA. Pretty simple and straightforward. And yeah, that's just about
You,
going to wrap it up for
yep.
us.
And you can always find me at Retrospective PC on Twitter, and hit us up.
We will be watching Raw tomorrow live, and we are going to do another recap show after the fact. We've gotten some feedback that you guys like the recap style shows, and I think just in general, it's a little bit easier to take in. You know, a nice 30 to 45 minute podcast instead of doing a 3 hour podcast, especially if we do it live.
Yes,
So
sir.
that's what we're going to be doing next week. Sorry, this week. So you can catch us on Tuesday. And as always, thanks for listening. Thanks for your support.
Peace out.